Hello, and welcome to today's webcast, Future Ready Detection and Response, SOC, SIEM, or MDR. My name is Christina, and I'm quickly going to run through some housekeeping items before we get started. We have about an hour for today's webcast, including time for questions at the end. Please submit questions using the Q&A widget. Today, we are joined by Steve Racing, CEO of ASMGi, and Jake Godgart, Product Marketing Manager of Rapid7. Now, I'll pass it over to Steve.
Great. Thank you, Christina. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for attending today. Steve Racing here, CEO of ASMGi. Just a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. And it's a very, very relevant and exciting topic about, what does a future-ready threat detection and response program and platform look like. And I'm pretty excited about the material. But some of the things that we're going to cover about the evolution, really, there's been a lot of technology evolution in both the analytics space and just log collection and SIEMs and various different things and all these options that people have to deal with. So we'll cover some of that material and just go through some of the history and evolution of the technology and various different things, managed detection and response in general. Our vendors actually meeting their bold claims, right? Everybody says they're going to basically solve world hunger with their platform and with their solution and various different things. And is that really happening, and where are the gaps, and how can we help you address those things? From a process standpoint, which is a critically important aspect of an MDR program or an IDR program, but what are the surprising, right? Maybe you'll be surprised a little bit by where your time is being spent and those types of things, and what pieces of the things that you're doing manually are really lend themselves nicely to automation and those kind of things. And future investments, right? What automation and orchestration, how does it fit within your enterprise and organization, and those kind of things. So before we get started, for those of you who don't know who ASMGi is, just a little bit about us. We're a global technology services and consulting firm. We really focus on a total solution, and what that really means to us is it's truly a people, process, and technology are all critically important elements of solving business problems. And so we try to bundle all of these things together and really present an outcome-based or an outcome-focused model for solving your specific problems, right? So how do we do it? We have an IT services practice, software practice, and cybersecurity practice, a lot of breadth and depth of knowledge and experience, headquartered in Cleveland, Ohio. Generally, we help our clients plan, manage, and execute strong programs, really, as a foundation for not just compliance, but certainly to meet compliance requirements, but also really just to shift the thinking and culture and make sure best practices are adopted across the organization. Best-in-class platforms and tools, really to drive value of the total solution through, more adoption, greater levels of adoption, and shorter times to value. Security ecosystem model. This is an important aspect of our approach to solving problems. Rapid7 certainly is in this field and has to really play nicely with a lot of other solutions that are feeding their system information and various different other things. That makes it really an ideal situation for us and an ideal partner. But we look for that in really everything that we do. Security isn't it's not a point solution problem. There's a lot of challenges and a lot of things going on. So it's critical to make sure that the point solutions that you're picking are really part of an ecosystem. And then I guess the number one thing is just really focusing on achieving results. We have a branded service called One Team that we wrap around technology, platforms, and various different things. But we really, again, want to really deliver a total solution to make sure that it includes, how are the people and process and technology challenges that you face addressed by the solution. It's really a fill-the-gap approach that we leverage. So we work with you to make sure we understand, where your strengths are, what areas you need help with, and those kind of things. And whatever that looks like to you, our philosophy is you shouldn't have to change your business process to fit our model. We should tailor the model really to work the way you want to work. So we really look for those gaps, whether it's expertise or headcount or, just capacity in general, and make sure that we're filling those gaps and working closely with you. And lastly, one of the philosophies at ASMGi is that actions equals results. You don't achieve any result without taking some action. But what really gets cool in this world of modern technology and platform approaches is artificial action really equals great results. So it's kind of a philosophy for us, and I think it fits well in context of the things we're going to talk about today. So what is managed incident detection and response? To me, it's really three components of a total solution. One is making sure that you have a formal program in place, and the program really has to drive not just the technical requirements, but also the process requirements, right? What happens if there is an incident, who's involved, practice, doing tabletop exercises and very different things. But having a formal program really dictates to your entire organization, this is what we're doing to address and identify and have visibility into what's going on in our environment, and this is how we handle incidents as they arise and different levels of incidents and those kind of things. Second, it's critical to have modern technology and services in place. The threat landscape is changing very quickly. Basically, the threat landscape today is a lot different than it was 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, even 2 years ago, right? So it's important to stay abreast of modern technology and have a platform that is adaptable and extensible and really helps you address the the current landscape, various different things. And then lastly, how do you execute, right? So if there is an incident, what happens now? And this is where I think a lot of enterprises really get in trouble, is they don't know what to do, and everybody wants to do the right thing. But having a structured program and procedure really mapped out on what happens if you do identify an incident, and what steps should you take to from there, basically. So that said, very excited about today's material and presentation. Rapid7 is a great partner. We're really excited about what they're doing with their IDR platform, and again, total solution, right? Their services bundled in, and we'll talk through some of that today. But keeping up with the threat landscape today is increasingly difficult, right? There are new threats coming out all the time. It's just the amount of data that your staff and your people have to manage and review, quite honestly, is just enormous, and it's almost unmanageable, right? So today we're going to talk through some of the ways that you can actually automate some of those tasks and do various different things to keep up with that. Most people, I don't think, would argue with what the challenges are, right? So how do you actually change the game? And this is one of the things I think that's really cool and interesting about the IDR platform, is it's a game changer. And I hope that we're able to communicate that to you today, and certainly address any of the questions that come up in the Q&A, but very excited about the solution as a whole. And lastly, our goal is to really help you succeed, right? We know it's challenging to do these things, and we feel like we've got a really proactive approach to help you kind of move the needle. And those things are going to show up in today's webinar. So very excited about that. And so now I'll turn it over to Jake, and Jake will take you through what Rapid7's platform is all about, and tools and approach and services and various different things. Thank you, Jake.
Thanks, Steve. Very honored to be here at the webinar with an excellent partner like ASMGi today. So thank you for inviting me, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. In the next 45 minutes, we'll be talking about choosing the best approach for threat detection and response for your organization. There's a lot of options out there, whether it's SIEM, managed SIEM, an MSSP, or managed security service provider. And then there's a big upward trend in managed detection and response, or MDR services. As Steve mentioned, we're going to go back. As Steve mentioned, we're going to share some of the emerging trends in the cybersecurity space that are creating challenges for security professionals, teams like yourselves. We'll talk about some of the programs and the systems that teams are implementing for better visibility into their events, and to make threat detection and to be able to respond to those detections. We'll touch on some of the reasons for looking at a SIEM, an MSSP, or an MDR service. And finally, this is where you come in. As you listen in and you think about the development of your own program, throw some questions out in the Q&A widget, and we'll do our best to address them at the end of the webinar. As Steve mentioned, I'm Jake Godgard. I'm part of the detection and response team here at Rapid7, and I guess without further ado, Steve did a great job introducing himself, so let's jump right in. I think the best way to start today's discussion is sort of to set the stage. I want to take a look at some research findings from Forrester that we found very compelling. Over half of the businesses surveyed, and this was around the globe, multiple industries, sizes of organizations, the results came back in that over half of them were breached in the last 12 months in 2018. To me, that's staggering and shows the real challenge that security teams face with persistent attackers trying to penetrate your defenses. When we dig a bit deeper, we can see where the majority of these attacks are targeting, and I want to highlight a few areas here. The first is external attacks continue to be the largest cause of breaches, with a rising amount of attackers taking advantage of unsecured web applications or looking for vulnerable software inside of the organization. Some are a result of malware or stolen credentials kinds of attacks, but there's also been an uptick year over year in the detection of malicious incidents internally. For example, when somebody good decides to go and perhaps be malicious. And of course, there's always insiders who just do dumb things, either by trying to circumvent policies or take a shortcut, or perhaps they didn't know a policy or something inadvertent happened where they exposed the data. And net is, wherever the case may be, it's something that we as security professionals have to be aware of and be prepared for, and to do what we have to in order to monitor the environment to circumvent all these things. So we look at Forrester's data in the top 5 data types breached. It's all the same things you think of, right? PII, payments and transaction data, account numbers, auth credentials. You can think of all the reasons why the auth credentials are valuable to an attacker. They have the keys of the kingdom, perform all kinds of attacks with them. They have access to all the data, the systems, etc., just by having authentication credentials. They can impersonate users and steal other valuable data such as IP. And when we talk about IP, it may not be something we think about enough in security, because most of our attention is turned to placing and making sure we address things that aren't regulated to keep compliance in good standard, for example. But when you consider how powerful IP is, it's many times the thing that maintains a competitive advantage or keeps the business going. It's that secret or confidential data that shouldn't be getting outside and letting your competitors or perhaps different countries accessing the data. Over the years, we've seen this intellectual property data start to creep up on this list into the top data types breached. So security professionals like ourselves should keep an eye on the IP safeguards to protect the business, not just ensure they're good for compliance. So the question is, with all these organizations running security programs, how is it that we're able to add security layers on top of that? And how can each organization level up their security posture in order to address these concerns? Well, the only way we're going to stop these things from happening is by having a better detection and identifying attackers far earlier in the attack chain. And that's the whole reason why we're talking today about SIEMs, SOCs, MSSPs, and MDRs. But in order to do that, we need to make sure we have 3 fundamental areas covered. They're basically the pillars of any good incident detection and response program. Obviously, it's the people that are with you. It's the technology that you use to detect everything and respond, and it's the process that you go about doing this. But before we talk about that, I think it's important for everyone to take an audit of where their starting point is for incident detection and response, and we'll use that as a guide. So here's the simple security maturity curve that we threw together from conversations we've had with our customers, and this is pretty generic. Your organization may fall into different buckets up here, whether it be for the people, the technology, or process. But if you think about these 3 aspects, everyone needs to address them with their program in order to really advance the program. The first is the people. What does your program look like? How many people do you have? Do you have enough people? Are they trained? Are they responsible for other objectives beyond just incident detection and response? Are they aware that they have those responsibilities? You'd be surprised how many times we find that they aren't as privy to that as we hope they would be. The next is the process. Do you have a good alert mechanism, or is it just noise? What are you doing to make sure you're going to respond to the investigations? How will you remediate them, mitigate them, contain them? And how do you respond when there's a breach? And the last piece is the technology. It's what are you using? Is it working for you? Do you feel you have a complete visibility into everything that you need to see? How much is maintenance do you have to do, whether that's creating new threat rules, updating the SIEM to match new threat intelligence? Those are all things that we need to be aware of. And to give you some context, we typically see larger enterprises somewhere towards the dark blue and gray areas, with very few reaching for that green on the right. That's sort of the nirvana where everybody needs to eventually get to. For the more immature companies who are looking to advance their security posture, we typically see them somewhere on the left 3 areas, reaching into that blue one in the middle. But it's not very easy to advance your security maturity, as many of you know. Customers who work with us typically have common barriers to reaching the next phase of their security maturity. Most come down to challenges with their staff, their internal resources, or the technology that they use. So I pose a question that everyone should ask themselves, which is, which of these challenges do you feel is currently existing in your program? As we mentioned before, the security landscape is always shifting, and Steve even alluded to it. It changes, year by year, day by day, and it becomes more challenging every single day. Most of these challenges are actually related to some of the emerging trends that we're seeing in the market. The first being that data has become a cyber currency, and that's amplified by innovations that happen. You see the attack surface grows with every innovation, meaning that the more you innovate, the greater at risk you are. And secure advancement balances this risk and the freedom for innovation, and that unsecure innovation will increase your attack surface. The second one is that customers are now being highly diligent in looking at brands and assessing risk and attributing risk to the brand based on their security posture. Customers are viewing security as a piece of that brand identity, and stronger security postures raise that brand equity. Proactive, security requires a deep understanding of risk profiles, and I mean, this stuff is really hard, right? Even the biggest companies have challenges. You name Yahoo, Marriott, Target, Equifax, et cetera, are all household names that aren't immune to having these security incidents happen themselves, which brings us to the last trend that we want to touch on, and that's there's a lot of need in the market for advancing the skill set to detect and respond to threats. There's a growing demand for security pros with advanced skill sets such as threat detection and response, and it's becoming a race to get that top talent. So we've currently hit a point where it's not just, if there's going to be an incident, but it's more like when there's going to be an incident, But you can reduce your risk and identify it and come up with a plan of action to detect threats and respond to them appropriately. And even when you identify them, it's always a moving target, and that's why security is so complex. So I'm actually going to ask Steve here, is there anything that you'd like to add from things that you're hearing from your customers as well?
Yeah, and great points that you brought up, Jake. One of the things that occurred to me as you were talking, when there is an incident, there's generally an investigation and all these things that you go through. There's a cyber insurance policy. It's got some inclusions, some exclusions, but everybody wants to figure out what happened, how did it happen, and various different things. If you're in a compliance setting, there may be fines and all kinds of different scenarios, right? But do care, like doing the things that you should be doing as an enterprise is a very huge part of like how big your fiscal liability is when a breach happens. And so I thought it was interesting the way that you approach these challenges, Jake. And one of the things I think that enterprises are struggling with is, we want to do the right things, but we don't have the capacity, or we don't have the expertise, or we don't have the budget, or whatever the case may be. It's about not just doing the right things, but doing the right things right. So what we see a lot in the enterprise is people trying to make sure that that they're applying due care, but just not able to do it with their current resources. So when we look at the threat landscape in general, and the place for managed detect and response solutions, for MDR solutions, it's really about, let's start all the way at the beginning and make sure that the program. You also mentioned, Jake, one of the things that you see a lot is that people are surprised when they find out they have responsibility for certain tasks, right? These are all things that sitting at the table and developing a program that addresses not just what's going to happen if there is an incident, but how do we even detect it? First of all the log files and all the noise and false positives and all of those things, it can just completely overrun security department at some enterprises, right? So start with a strong program, but think through all of those elements from point zero, where a compromise happens. How do you even know it, right? And shorten that time, as you pointed out, as much as possible. But make sure that the program addresses what to do day to day, what to do when there is an incident, and various different things. And then the other part is just, ask for help where you need it. And I think that's really what today is about. Is there is help available, and there are modern approaches to help just alleviate some of the strains on current security departments and the amount of data that they have to deal with and those kind of things. So program, platform, and then people and process, like you talked about. Make sure that, and that's part of actually developing a program. Make sure you're clear. Clarity. Who is responsible for what? Do you have those resources in-house? Are you going to add headcount for that, or is that going to go into the, something you look for help outside the organization for, and those kind of things? So, again, I would possibly even overemphasize the importance of having a program to define the requirements for your technology and for your people and for your processes. So that to me is where a lot of enterprises are saying, hold on, we don't know how to address this problem. We don't have a program in place, so let's start there. Make sense?
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. Those are great points. Those are fantastic points. And, I think you touched on a lot of these in terms of the challenges we're seeing. This, again, comes from Forrester. But one of the growing problems that we have with security monitoring in this space is that the technology that you spoke of, there's just so many alerts and so much data and so much activity that we generated that there isn't enough people to respond to that. And this is one of the things that I think we've gotten a little bit better in the security space, is getting the right alerts to people and putting the right emphasis on those alerts. The issue is we have as well, though, is that we have more data today than we've ever had before, right? So even though we're getting better at identifying those things and the things that are important, and we're doing that in a much larger data set, it's still overwhelming for analysts. I was on a call the other day, to give an example, with a security pro who told me the complexity of her environment had gotten so complex to monitor, with everything on-premise devices to her remote workforce in the cloud, that it's just not something her team currently had the capability to handle. And as you said, Steve, that's okay. Reach out for help, right? What would be worse is if she realized that what she was doing a year ago wouldn't continue to work and still tried it, right? She told me her originally thought that she could handle it, but after all, she couldn't. And she set up that program and started to do those things that you talked about, and that the environment was so complex that they did need help, right? They either needed it from a third party, or they needed to bring consultants or staff up and hire people to help. Another thing we hear is that they're also taking a lot of time out of their day-to-day tactical stuff, which may necessitate that they bring more people into the building, in-house, or they go and look for those third-party services. Or if they do bring people in, maybe they can't find the right people with the right skill sets to come in and help them. So whatever the reasons are, perhaps we're not able to get everything we want done with our internal security teams, and we need to reach outside. Maybe that's not the case for everybody. We'll kind of touch on the right use cases for reaching outside versus doing it yourself in just a bit. But part of the challenge, and we mentioned this before, is that the technology that's out there is spitting out a ton of events and alert data all the time. So it's hard to figure out where to look, and it becomes either a prioritization challenge, an alert fatigue challenge, or you get into that habit of analysis paralysis. So I'm sure
just one quick point.
Yeah. Yep.
Jake, one thing just occurred to me as you were talking about that specific challenge. It's not just about the data, but it is about the data, the amount of data that analysts are required to review and look at. But there's an expectation. It's that problem is compounded by the market has an expectation that you've got eyes on that 100% of the time, right? You never take your eye off the ball. And I think that's that it just compounds. There's more data every day, and you need to have eyes on it 24/7, basically, and that's the expectation, right? When you think about that do care thing, that you'll know right away if something wrong happens. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there because it's really a compounding problem, I think.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I'm sure everybody out there has some sort of SIEM solution, or they're actively investigating whether it makes sense for them to invest in one, right? One thing we've noticed over the years is the evolution of this detection and response technology. And I sort of threw this together as a timeline just to illustrate the point. In the early 2000s, it was all about perimeter defense, right? Just bringing all the alerts for the things and getting that into a security event management system so that you could report on it. We could look at it to do forensics on it. And then we have someone do manual validation and breach response, which produced a lot of false positives and is pretty hard to scale. As we've progressed into the mid-2000s, we had a decade of that compliance-driven security investments, where governing bodies were like, hey, you have a lot of stuff to monitor. You have to retain all the logs. You have to have reporting and auditability and all that kind of stuff. So then the security information management systems in the market started to pop for compliance and reporting, but tech providers to get those systems to where they're focused on helping a security-first focus always struggled, right? So what I mean by that is it wasn't really being useful for detections and getting us out of that alert fatigue sort of problem. It was more of this like SIEM 1.0, where all the rules-based threat detections were there, and it was very compliance-focused. If you look at today's environment, now we're starting to see the emergence of big data type architectures to handle all the data flow that we're bringing in. We're starting to see smart solutions that look at things like behavioral anomaly detections. Back in 2015, Rapid7 actually came out with our user behavior analytic detections, which used a bit of machine learning to augment the rules-based systems of the SIEM to reduce the headaches of benign alerts and false positives, which in turn allowed us to find the things that were really important, and the rules-based systems never were really able to provide that without a lot of manual investigation. These UBA rules look at what users are doing. How are they authenticating from things? Is it legitimate? Do they look for things that are different from normal actions, right? Really getting into the behaviors of what our individual users are doing. With attackers finding new ways to be sneaky and evade detection, one of the things that's most useful using UBA to find is when a user deviates from the mean and investigate from there in order to validate it. So in today's ecosystem, that's where we see three of these tools and methods coming together to provide a security detection response platform, as Steve mentioned, really getting that platform together. Like what we have with Inside IDR, which really combines all these ways of looking at security data. So I guess the next piece is sort of what does that implementation of today's modern program look like? Well, there's a place in the market segment for all three of these things. So I'll preface that with saying it. But we have people coming to us all the time saying, hey, we want to get a SIEM, so we're checking out different vendors. And we're like, okay, that's fantastic. How many people do you have? And they respond, oh, we got 2. And that becomes a challenge because traditional SIEM's probably not going to get you there in terms of what you need to do with the SIEM. Because you got to be able to customize the setup, someone's got to monitor it, tune it, etc. SIEMs may be really good for a highly customized environment with larger, more mature security teams where they know what they're doing when it comes to writing rules, setting up alerts, all those sort of things. And when they have bandwidth to triage all the alerts and the SIEM will kick off, that's great. That really is the only relevant for those with a highly staffed, highly skilled team in order to take that on. The other one we see many times is the MSSP. So for less mature businesses, most organizations historically have turned to that MSSP provider so they can have somebody else set up the rules, do all the administration, all those kinds of things, while the internal team can take care of understanding the business and taking action on those alerts that get passed over. For some teams, that may be fine, and it might be what they're looking for. But from where we sit with Rapid7 and our MDR offering, we see this approach has a lot of drawbacks. The internal team now just basically offloaded the SIEM management, but they still need to do all the investigations, the validations and remediations of that work. That traditional MSSP model isn't very flexible, and people often struggle because they aren't able to get the visibility that they want to see and what's happening on the MSSP side of things, or get the value that they want out of it. Certainly a traditional MSSP sounds great on paper, but it only really helps for logging and alerting, as well as compliance reporting, to have some 24/7 visibility. Beyond that, it doesn't provide a whole lot of depth in terms of proactive measurements for in terms of security teams, right? That's where the new emergence of MDR, Managed Detection and Response Services, come into play. Definitely not the, hey, we're going to just manage your SIEM and your endpoints and all that stuff. MDR solutions are really focused instead on detecting threats in your environment, more proactive approach with a more prescriptive approach as well. So instead of saying we're just going to be vendor agnostic, sit back and you bring us anything and we'll manage it, it's more of a, hey, we're going to tell you the technology that you really need to have in place so you can provide a high level of quality of service and get that high value delivery back. MDR services provide a lot more analytics on top of everything that you're seeing. We're going to take on the detection, the investigation, the validations, building signatures, and tuning the SIEM pieces like an MSSP would, and then go above and beyond that. So at the end of the day, MDR teams will actually look for threats using threat intelligence and having some really smart people behind the technology and tools. So instead of having this alert-based notification service, it's more action-based, saying, hey, we saw something, we looked into it, here's what we did. Oh, and by the way, here's what you need to do to contain it, to remediate the situation, and mitigate potential threats like this in the future. Definitely a stark contrast from the traditional MSSP approach. So MDR services, where are they a fit? So they're a great fit for mid-market and even larger enterprise organizations that don't really have a lot of in-house security experience, or in the case of enterprises, they want a second set of eyes looking at what's going on to augment their own staff, because their own staff is overwhelmed with what they need to cover, inside that 8 to 5 time frame or 9 to 5 time frame, and they need 24/7 coverage. Or perhaps organizations prefer outsourcing, and if you have a really small team, outsourcing a lot of the day-to-day, blocking and tackling would free you up to work on some more of those priority initiatives that you just don't have the time for. Again, detection and response provides requires a very specific skill set. And to hire that in-house analyst, they're very tough to come by, and it's expensive to hire. And a lot of the people, can't afford to have that on their team, or perhaps they don't necessarily have the skills in the area where they live. So you can always outsource that to another provider like an MDR service. Get that expertise brought in-house for you, basically by outsourcing it, and actually have that proactive threat hunting and response service working at your organization. And it also, just like a SIEM, an MDR is really strong for compliance requirements, so you're always killing multiple birds with that single service. Steve, is this what you guys are hearing too, and some of the reasons why people are choosing to go with an MDR service versus build it in-house?
Yeah, and I love this slide, Jake, and I literally, even 5 years ago probably, some of our clients who had gone with an MSSP solution started coming to us and saying, hey, what are you guys doing or seeing in this space? Because we don't feel like we're getting the value that we thought we were going to get, right? And I think the way that you addressed that was spot on, right? What MSSPs were doing was promising a solution and really just kind of setting a layer on top of the SIEM and kind of redirecting. It was like adding another node, right? But you're still getting all the alerts, or most of the alerts, the ones that weren't filtered, and various different things. And what enterprises were saying, what we really need is somebody to actually solve problems for us, right? And this is, I think this is what, I think the whole detect and respond, language and market emerged from the shortcomings that were being delivered in MSSP solutions to basically consume logs and things like that. So, very, very consistent with what you shared. And what I like about MDR is that, and it ties back to that total solution approach at ASMGi, and it's a great synergy when we look at Rapid7's MDR solution, because it's really about helping enterprises solve the problem, right? So first you have to define what it is, what's the problem that you want to solve, but it isn't just catching alerts from SIEMs. It's actually, anomaly detection, keeping eyes on the store all the time and looking for behavioral changes, right? When things aren't right, leveraging your technology platform to, help just do that, right? There's no way that a human can keep eyes on, and certainly for large enterprises, right? If you have thousands of employees, you have all these things to keep track of. So you need smart technology to do that, but you can't do it without people either, because people always have to make a decision about, what to do with an alert and make sure that it's accurate and do all those other things. So bundling all that into an MDR solution, I think is a critical step for enterprises. And we're definitely seeing that that's what enterprises want and that's what they need today. So a lot of synergies there for sure.
Absolutely. And Steve, I love that you brought up those things, right? The people, the process, and the technology stack. Each one of those could be its own webinar, and we could dive deep into those. This stuff is just really complex. And with those challenges we mentioned earlier, it's even harder to make sure you have a strong security program, especially with the complexities of cybersecurity, especially in threat detection and response. So that's why we're here, right? So our mission at Rapid7 is to help you simplify those complexities and become a true partner for helping you navigate the cybersecurity world. And I'm sure Steve and his organization can help, do this as well, with their approach, as he mentioned. With our MDR service, we focus on helping the team take care of three key pillars, right? The first is to help understand the ways in which you need to protect your data and help you see how attackers are targeting you and how to find them. The second is you get somebody and you get a team of people on your side to help you accelerate your maturity beyond just that detection and response, but rather help you across all 20 CIS critical controls. And we work with Steve's team to do this for many customers as well. And then provide you with the resources to stand up an effective incident detection and response program. And Steve mentioned this before, but I'll reiterate it again. The biggest thing that we have to do is really define what that program is and who's responsible for what and why you need to do this stuff, right? So we built our MDR offering to meet our customers at really any level of security maturity and to help them with their own security maturity journey, not just manage the SIEM or kick over those alerts over the fence to your team. We do this by leveraging our top security expertise. Steve talked about how hard it was to acquire the people there, leveraging our cloud SIEM inside IDR, that technology stack, and then layering on the process to help you find that nefarious activity and stop attackers in their tracks and accelerate your journey to becoming more mature, right? So when you think about what's best for your business, look for a vendor that's going to help you accelerate that security maturity, not just take a box for you to reduce the headaches of today's problems, because tomorrow's complexity of security problems will hit pretty fast, right? So I think the thing that I'll do to spend the last few minutes discussing is how our MDR service at Rapid7 is a little bit different than others around. We touched on it a little bit, but really our service is focused on reducing the complexities of that detection and response program. And I'm sure if you talk to any MSSP or any MDR vendor out there, you'll hear that people, process, and technology over and over again. But at Rapid7, we take a slightly different approach to managed services. We focus on becoming that security maturity accelerator for you by partnering at a strategic level to manage towards those outcomes that we're all trying to achieve, rather than just managing technology like a traditional MSSP. And I know, Steve, you guys at ASMGi are of the same mindset. Would you care to elaborate a little bit on what an outcome-driven approach means to you guys?
Yeah, that's great. And again, I love the slide, and it's very congruent and consistent with our approach to solving business problems, right? So three things I think that are critical in figuring out how to deliver an outcome. The first one, Mr. Obvious here, right? But you have to define the outcome. And some people skip that step, believe it or not, and just knee-jerk to trying to solve a specific pain point or do whatever, right? But really focusing on what is the outcome, what does success look like, right? What is the outcome that you're trying to achieve? Number two is like architecting a process to achieve that result. And that middle piece, that really includes, people, process, and technology. You can't really solve a lot of these challenges without having modern technology in place, but you have to have the expertise and the people and the staff levels and various different things to support that. So define the outcome, build the process to achieve the outcome. And the third critical piece to an outcome-based, I think, approach is measuring, right? You have to be able to measure, are you moving closer to the outcome, delivering the outcome or not delivering the outcome? What are the metrics that are going to help you, decide if you're actually on track to achieve the result that you know that you intended to do? So when you talk about an MDR program, there are several things that generally you're trying to achieve, right? So general objectives, but one of them is early detection, right? So there's that, and I mean that is the action, right? Or the acronym, detect and respond. One is the detection piece, gaining that visibility. That's a critical objective in putting a program together for MDR, right? Is early detection. It impacts every part of a breach scenario or compromise scenario. How soon can you detect that somebody, some threat actor is on your network and those kind of things? The respond piece is another critical objective, right? Most enterprises now are not just looking for eyes on the store. They want help actually taking action when something happens, and so doing that in a structured way. But those are the kind of things, and I think that this is one of the reasons I'm so excited to be partnered with Rapid7, is because your model is very congruent with the way that we think and the way that we approach solving our customers' business problems. So, and I think the market is really, coming around to this focus area, right? The market, what they want now is not just a portfolio of point solutions. What they want is actual outcomes. And so I think from that perspective, MDR is a good fit in what people are asking for as well.
Yeah, those are some great points and stuff that we prescribe to as well. I think that to touch a little bit on, reiterating what you said with Rapid7 MDR, I think we can sort of boil it down to focusing on three goals, right? The first is finding those malicious actors in your environment with early detection. That's something you talked about there. The second I heard is sort of stopping those attackers right in their tracks, right? And then responding to them. And luckily for us, we have leading technology and service teams that have SOAR capabilities and automations baked into the MDR offering and inside IDR. So from a findings report, you can click, a deep link and go take it and, have a one-click action to contain an asset or something. And I think that the third thing we focus on is creating a lasting security partnership that really helps you to accomplish your security goals from now into the future, right? And so, I'll spend a little bit of time talking about our MDR service at a high level here, and it's really designed to focus on these areas, right? We have a customer advisor, and that's something that's unique to Rapid7 and the people section, who's an expert in your environment for all things security and has a technical acumen to give you tailored guidance and recommendations to advance the program, right? This is augmented by 24/7 SOC staffed by experts that have experience investigating things from high fidelity alerts to low fidelity ones and threat hunting and incident response. And the SOC really leverages that technology, the Insight IDR and our Insight agent, to pull metadata that allows us to get leading behavioral analytics to find threats on each endpoint, right? So our detection methodologies include UBA, user behavior analytics, ABA, attacker behavior analytics, deception technology, all things included inside IDR, as well as threat hunting, human validation and detections based on the threat intelligence infrastructure that we have at Rapid7, which is absolutely phenomenal. We push out a ton of research, and basically anything from the MDR team and anything you see in our research is from our MDR, service offering as well. And when we detect something, one of the things that's unique to us, or I wouldn't say unique, but a strong differentiator between what Rapid7 MDR does and something like an MSSP, is our analysts go through and validate each of those alerts to ensure we're only sending over the positive threats. So you can really focus on the outcome of risk remediation, containment, and mitigation without spending that time tracking down false positives, right? As I mentioned before, we incorporate SOAR capabilities to automate many of those manual tasks for remediation, which is super helpful to make that small team that you may have as efficient as one of many, many more people. And if we do find a breach, one of the things that is unique to Rapid7 is that you could use one of two incident escalations that come with your contract to go and remediate that. So these aren't time capped. Basically, the goal is to make sure that we're able to remediate the situation completely with you, tell you exactly what happened, how to fix it. And those are the things where, like, if something really bad happens, you have a partner who's dedicated, who's on your side, who's looking out for you, both from the threat detection standpoint and also on the remediation standpoint as well. And I know, Steve, you guys during your program development always talk about tabletop exercises and what are plans. So I was going to see, before I finish off my aspect here, is that something you wanted to touch on a little bit in terms of building out that program and process?
Yeah, that's a great point. I appreciate you bringing that up because one aspect of it's great to write a great program and put it in a binder or put it in a folder and various different things and define roles and responsibilities and all that. But to really, when an incident happens, first of all, it's not going to be what you expect and it's not going to be when you expect, right? These things don't generally show up at our convenience. It's the heat of battle, right? So that is not the time to hope that people really understand what their responsibility and what the next step is. Who do I call? Who do I notify? Who can touch this? Do I shut down the server? Do I do this or do I do that? At the time of an incident is not the time to figure those things out. Part of having a mature program, I think, is practice, and that's what tabletop exercises do. So we're working with a lot of enterprises today that are saying, hey, we want to put some scenarios together and actually do tabletop exercises against them. So as part of the incident response programs that we're working with enterprises on, a lot more people, I think, are saying, hey, we need to practice this and do various different things. So there's generally a presentation, there's a definition of a scenario, and you basically try to emulate an actual attack, right, or an actual incident. And you get all the right people in the room, and everybody has a clear understanding of what their roles and responsibilities are and what the next step is. And doing this at a certain cadence, quarterly seems to be a pretty popular model. Introduce a couple new scenarios each quarter and structure a tabletop exercise quarterly around those things. So definitely seeing more focus and emphasis on what happens when you are compromised today, and I think it just lends itself to the consensus in the industry that it's not if, it's when, right? So people are definitely taking a look at it, I think, and saying we need to make sure that we're prepared, and doing tabletop exercises and actually practicing these steps, I think, is a critical part.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. And I think just to wrap things up, I want to leave you all with this. Both of us at Rapid7 and ASMGi have a focus on providing this outcome-driven service, not a service where we're just managing your technology and passing over alerts or require your team to take on a heavy lift. So, of course, there's way more to the MDR service. And I encourage anybody, if you're interested, we'd love to connect with you and reach out to ASMGi with Steve and his fantastic team to really get that deeper detail into what might be best for you and your team at your current, security maturity level. So, Steve, that's all I had prepared for today. I'd love to get back over to you if there's anything else I'm forgetting here. But I think if not, we might be able to just look at some questions here.
Okay. Yeah, great. One thing I'll mention just real quick is that if anybody is at RSA or has team members that are RSA, Rapid7 has a booth there. Myself and our CIO, Frank Yako, are both here. ASMGi doesn't have a booth on the floor, but we are available. If you're out here, if you're in San Francisco, let us know. We'd love to connect, and Rapid7 is there, so we could actually sit down and show you some of this stuff. But that said, Christina, do you want to queue up some questions? I'm not sure I'm smart enough to figure out how to toggle through these things.
Yeah, definitely. So there are a few questions that we've gotten so far. The first question is, why do you need detection and response? Can't you just prevent all of it?
What do you think, Jake? You want to start on that one? I can certainly reflect on that a little bit. I think it would be great if you could prevent incidents from happening. And I think consensus in the industry today is that, if somebody really wants to get in, they're getting in, and they may already be there, quite honestly. And that was really, in my opinion, a driver for MDR as a category, as a market space emerging, is that, it used to be put a firewall in place and protect the perimeter and create that sense of security, quite honestly, right? Today, I think there isn't really a perimeter, and the dark side, right? Cyber attacks, that's an actual business, and people are going after things that have value, right? So you steal something that you can sell, quite honestly, and whether it's intellectual property or credit cards or health records or whatever the case may be, people are going after those things because that's what they do to make a living. And like it or not, they will get on your network. And so I think just preventing an incident is probably, and again, consistent with the market. I don't think that's really the consensus. I think most people are of the belief that it's not if, but it truly is not if, but it's when, right? So I think our approach and the whole purpose for MDR is to be prepared when that does happen. Anything to add to that, Jake? Absolutely.
It was kind of funny. I started talking and I realized I was on mute before. So I think I agree with everything you just said. The last thing I think I would add is that security and protecting things, like you said, that there's no such thing as a perimeter anymore, right? I think, security and getting your posture correct and defending against attackers is always a moving target. I mean, at Rapid7, we do a tremendous amount of research, and every single time we look at it, phishing is probably the number one mode of entry, and after that, it's always changing, right? The attackers are getting smarter. It's hard to prevent all the things. It's almost impossible at that point because attackers get smarter, and that's really where UBA and ABA rules come into play, where you can start looking at. You can't look at preventing it, but you can always look at detecting it, right? When there's an issue. So I think that's really it comes down to the attackers are getting smarter. It's always a moving target. They're going after things like you said, the different types of data. For instance, credit card numbers used to be the number one thing that they would go after because it's easy to get money off of that. But now it's shifting, and the healthcare records are something really valuable. The things that they can sell, like the IP, it is a business for these guys. And as unfortunate as that is, sometimes you can't prevent everything that will happen, but you can always make sure that you catch it. And I think that's the biggest thing is that we're trying to catch as early in the attack chain as we possibly can, with the preventative measures that we already have in place.
Right. You know what? A lot of times I equate the current state of the security space with home protection. Like at one time, the thought was, if I don't want people to break into my house, I need to make sure my doors are locked, and that created a sense of security, right? But then so somebody wiggles the doorknob, finds out the door's locked, and they open a window and they climb in anyway, and so. Time to change our policy, right? Now when we leave the house, we need to make sure the doors are locked and the windows are locked, right? Now the attacker sees that the door's locked, sees that the window's locked, so they just break the glass and they get in anyway, right? So there's a whole market of home security protection services that emerged as a result of that. So now you put an alarm system in, which is a lot like an MDR in the enterprise, right? Somebody is monitoring the alarms. If somebody opens a door when it's not supposed to be, breaks a window or opens a window when it's not supposed to, the home security system will catch the alert, call the police, somebody will show up in various different things. And that's really the way the security, in my opinion, the landscape of security has kind of evolved in a similar pattern. And that's kind of where the role that I see MDR playing in all of that. Looks like we're getting close to the end of the seminar here. Are you still on, Christina? Are you still on, Jake? I think we may have lost our other party. So I just want to thank everyone for making it to the webinar today. And as Jake indicated earlier, please, if you have any questions, reach out. We'd love to have a conversation with you. We're very excited about what Rapid7 is doing in this space, and we really think that it fits well into our total solutions approach. And again, we'd love to sit at the table and understand what challenges you're trying to solve, and see if this is a good fit to getting you there. So thank you everyone, and please follow up with any additional questions.
Thanks, Steve. Love being on the call today and the webcast. I thought it was really valuable, and hopefully everybody thought so as well. So take care, and thanks again for everybody for coming by.